Before I joined UAL, I came from Google. Google had this problem in extremes. Yeah? And part of the reason I was brought in was to look at a project where our buildings were non-responsive. I was literally brought in to help resolve that particular tension.
Yeah.
And that led us in a certain direction. And there's some really good lessons here. So what we began to do was to look at the estate, the AV estate, and work out. We got to the point where we were able to design small meeting rooms that could be deployed within 24 hours. And what you saw was business units, and business units at Google were typically like 40 people, given a space and then given almost a tool set to be able to change as they wanted to the way in which their office space was deployed.
Yeah. Yeah. In this conversation I'm having with you, it seems like lots of it, the theme really is, I want to keep the Future Workplace podcast, completely free so that we can ensure that we're giving you good, informative content about the future of workplace. But B, I want to try and ensure that we're getting really top quality guests on. I'm sure you'll agree that this particular podcast is a fantastic guest. In order for me to ensure that I'm attracting really good guests so that we're giving really fantastic information on each and every podcast, we need to try and ensure that there's a reach of audience there. So in order for me to A, keep it free, and B, ensure that the caliber of guests are at a standard where you're getting really top quality information, here's my only request. Follow us, subscribe, whatever platform it is that you're watching this on now, press the little button, you'll subscribe, which will increase our audience, our viewership, which will increase the likelihood of us getting really good quality guests on the show and improve the quality of content that we're giving you. So that's it. Enjoy the show. Welcome, Future Workplace Podcast. I'm delighted to welcome Gary Keane. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
I'm delighted to have you with me. And as we just said before we came in here, I've been following you for a couple of years on your socials, and I've obviously always been very impressed by you as an individual. And so I'm ecstatic to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
For those that haven't followed you for 2 years and sounded too much like a stalker, who are you and what do you do?
So currently I'm the head of audiovisual at the University of the Arts, London. And for anyone in the audience who doesn't know UAL, and I'll call it UAL going forwards, we're a university that has around 19,000 students and around 4,000 academic and support staff. As you can probably infer from our name, we are an arts university. We're a creative university. We have 5 quite significant campus buildings, all based in and around central London, and we teach a vast range of creative subjects. And you can look at it on the one hand from loom weaving all the way through to cutting edge digital production skills.
Fantastic. And that sounds like a very complex and diverse role. What's your role specifically then within the university?
So I'll talk a little about what created the need for the role. Yeah. So I'll talk about UAL's history a little bit, and then that will potentially sort of open up into what I do and how I do it.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah.
So until relatively recently, because UAL itself is only about 20 years old, but some of the colleges that comprise UAL, they're over 150 years old. So places like Central St Martin's, Chelsea College of Art, London College of Fashion, these are like significant educational brands which came together around 20 years ago to create UAL ostensibly as like an administration layer that took on tasks that were really too large for a single college.
Gotcha.
Yeah? And originally that was things like clearing.
Right.
But increasingly and more recently, it's been with regards to technology and the way in which technology is rolled out across colleges.
Yes.
Yeah. So I joined, where we're now coming up for 2 years ago. There's 5 different college AV teams. Mm-hmm. They are excellent to a man and a woman. Their focus, not exclusively, but primarily is on teaching support. So ensuring that our 524 teaching and meeting spaces are all ready every single day, and to work on some of the more complex events that we do. So they often get involved in quite significant live events and also exhibition work as well. So again, an increasing number of our students work in the digital realm, So when it comes to exhibition season, which is how your work as a student is marked and assessed, we turn into this massive art gallery all across London. And the AV teams are deeply involved in the setup of those temporary installations and the management of them.
That's really impressive and quite a logistical challenge, right? For the 5 teams, 524 spaces. How do you stay on top of that?
It's a really good question, and it assumes we do stay on top of it. And I'm also going to say I think we do a really good job in staying on top of it. So part of the reason for me joining was to look at the technology life cycle and to work out where the college teams really needed help and support. So if we look at the technology life cycle, you can see like from what I've described already that the operational side, the day-to-day customer engagement around running lessons and seminars and workshops and live events and exhibitions, that's done really well by the 5 local college teams. Where the teams didn't really have like a consistent level of skill and experience was when it came to design of those spaces. That was much more hit and miss, because historically the individual colleges had made their own decisions. So there were 5 different AV strategies in place, 5 different sets of purchasing decisions, 5 different operational models, 5 different support models. For good reasons, there was a lot of diversity there. But there was also a recognition there are certain things that we hold in common, and that if someone could come along and help us identify those, that would allow us to start sort of coalescing around certain ideas and certain designs and begin to take a certain direction in the way that we support teaching through the use of technology. And that's essentially what I do.
That's a common pain, isn't it, for organisations who are going through M&As, or they've got multiple locations across the world. You've got different P&Ls, you've got different procurement processes, and they've all got different standards that they roll out. One of the pieces of work we do a lot with some of our global clients is standardising meeting rooms, basically, and standardising the warranties and the service contracts, etc. And so it sounds like, where are you on that journey? So I know you've only been at the UA for, was it two years?
Just under 2 years.
Just
now.
Under 2 years. So how has that journey evolved over these 2 years, if that's been the role that you were brought in to do?
It started off with lots of listening.
Gotcha.
Lots and lots of listening to understand what was working well, what wasn't working so well, and also what was the environment the AV teams, the college AV teams were working in. What were the expectations on them, and what resources did they have? So it took me a number of months to really build up a picture of where they were able and capable and resourced to do excellent work, and where they needed help and assistance. Now, and again, if we go back to that technology life cycle, where I think we bring a degree of experience and also the ability to look at the bigger problem from a slightly higher level, is in 2 areas. One is design, and I'm actually going to sort of expand that to say design and deployment, so design and installation, and then on the support side as well. So I think when you change your perspective to look at like the AV problem from a college level to a university level, when you go about thinking from, say, 3,000 people in one building to 19,000 people across 5 buildings, you have a change in perspective.
Yeah, of course.
And again, like really where the difference is, or rather where we're making most difference, is in design and build, and also in support. Because they're areas where if you're an operational manager in a college and you've got a really busy roster on a day-to-day basis of supporting teaching spaces and live events and exhibitions, someone comes along and asks you to do design work, that doesn't necessarily fit in that well to the skill set you've got and the day-to-day demands that are there. So we've come along and said, okay, let's work with you to understand what need is here based on customer need. And we can turn that into a series of designs that we can begin to roll out across different colleges, where we recognise that what's being taught, and more importantly, the way in which it's being taught, is common.
Understood.
And so that's what we're working towards.
Yeah, and that's amazing, isn't it? Because it sounds to me like it's a real heavy emphasis on the consultation piece at the start, which is around, well, what do you want? You know, let's really understand the use case in your world. Your clients are, you know, your students. What do you want, and how are we going to get there? So how do you make a decision from a technology standpoint based off of the functionality consultation period that you go through?
So for us, technology comes last. Yeah. So we feel it's worth investing time and effort into a series of really deep conversations that allow us to understand what's needed. And so I'm gently going to pick up you on your language there. So we talk about needs,
yes,
as opposed to wants. What wants tends to look forwards and imagines potentially ideal futures.
Yeah.
Needs is a little more concrete and is based on what goes on today.
Yeah.
So we're really interested in understanding from both the academic and the student experience, because again, we see ourselves working with two audiences there, students and academics, to understand what their experience needs to be like from walking in the door, closing the door of this teaching space behind them, all the way through to exiting.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So a heavy focus on needs. And again, that leads us into sort of quite concrete conversations about how things should work, how they should perform. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we've got that in place, that leads us to a position where we can begin to think about the technology that supports that.
Yes.
Now, I've described that as two processes, and that says that there's a process that sits in the middle of it, or rather sits around the needs gathering, which is the strategic work that we're doing. Yeah. So what we're doing there is looking at where AV fits into the intersection of three very important strategic efforts that are going on at UAL. And I sort of imagine these as like the moving tectonic plates at UAL. So there's learning strategy, there's estate strategy, and there's technology strategy. And AV is sort of fairly unique in that it sits right in the middle of those three. So if you imagine them intersecting, I think we're the only discipline that sits right in the middle of all of those three.
You have to have a hand on it all, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. So again, a lot of the work we've been doing is understanding what drives learning strategy and learning thinking, what understands estate strategy, and what underpins technology strategy. So we have to align with all three of those alongside being able to understand what our users' needs are and translating those users' needs into hardware choices.
Yeah. It's funny, I was watching, as you were talking there, and you rightly picked me up on my language around needs versus wants. I was watching something yesterday on TV around the effect of COVID on children and on COVID children, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. How have the needs changed based off of COVID and the requirements that students have now versus the requirements that students had pre-2020?
So we're a little bit of an outlier, but we have some interesting use cases there because much of our work is really practical. It's hands-on. And so it gets done on campus. If you come and visit us at our King's Cross campus, Central St Martin's, you can walk into these huge studios that are full of ceramicists making pots and the like.
Yeah.
And you can't do that at home.
Yeah.
So we are primarily like an on-prem or an on-site institution because of the nature of the work we do. But what is beginning to change around that is a couple of things that begin to touch on hybrid work and sort of link back to your question about COVID. So our geographical footprint is growing. We have a fantastic reputation within the creative arts industry. And so there's conversations going on with other similar institutions in other countries where we might twin with them to teach certain subjects. And we've just rolled out this fantastic little case study where at Camberwell College of Arts, a master's in graphic design is taught. And it's co-taught with an institution in Kyoto, in Japan. So you have lecturers on both sides.
Yeah.
You have about 15 students in each location. And they're bringing in their work, and their work can be 2D and 3D. And they bring in their work and they demonstrate their work. And we need to capture that in a way that can be seen at really high quality at the other end.
Yeah.
And then the interaction that goes on with this larger group that critiques the work that again needs to be captured at really high quality too.
Understood.
So I think for us, like almost like the conventional hybrid world is something that we do a little bit of work with, because again, we do things like lecture capture for students who are unwell or just unable to come to a particular lecture. The hybrid world is something that we're not that deeply involved in the sense of saying like, oh, we use Teams and we can just have people dialing in by Teams.
Yeah.
We're looking at a problem set and again, like technology solutions to that are really difficult and complex.
Yeah, and also working with third-party universities, as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
You don't have any control over the standard of technology that they've deployed, right? So
no, over time, we hope that will change.
Yeah.
But again, unless we fund their spend, we have to go with what they've got and make the best of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really interesting and complex set of problems to work with.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the technology changes so quickly, right? You know, I've just given one example, which is the extreme example around COVID, which was 5 years ago, and the way that people work, whilst not necessarily relevant for an on-prem working environment like yours, it evolves so quickly. And so how do you maintain a level of staying ahead of the curve? How do you get to the point where you're not the dinosaur, you know, who where everybody else is telling you, Gary, we should do it this way? How do you stay ahead of that?
So there's two answers here, and I'll do the simple one and the more complex one, and they're two different answers. So the simple one is through annual funding. So we try and avoid that scenario where you build into a new building, you fund it, and you make the assumption nothing's going to change in there for 5 years or 8 years. Yeah, because I think in that approach that there lies problems. Yeah. Often the rate of change from where you move to where you're moving to, the rate of change in the user experience or the customer experience is extreme. Yeah, and it makes it really difficult for the new audience to actually understand how to work things and operate things.
Yeah.
Also, too, I think you often in that situation, you get your crystal ball out and you're thinking, where might we be in 8 years' time? And you make long-term bets. And again, the market moves so quickly and there's so many external factors that are really difficult to account for that I think it's impossible to have any idea where we're going to be in 8 years' time.
Yeah.
For us, when we do our forecasting, and this is sort of like a segue into like the second part of my answer, if we say, okay, what are we going to be teaching, to whom, and where and how, we have about a 3-year horizon before we think we're dropping to less than 50% certainty. And at that point, we're guessing.
Yeah.
So part of our challenge is how do we become more creative and flexible and dynamic in our design thinking, so we're not tying ourselves to long-term bets around hardware choices that just may be useless or redundant in 3 to 4 years' time.
Yeah.
So to like specifically answer the question, what drives change in our organization is, again, this intersection of teaching need, so changing pedagogical need, and changing estate's needs, and much less so technology change. So we're trying to wean ourselves off the addiction of buying new technology because it's new.
Because it looks pretty, or
it's a new standard. We're trying to move away from that to a point where change for us is really driven by the academic community saying we need to make a change. So for us, one of our key measures is this idea that if we measure the sentiment of how the academics and the students are responding to our work, if we're capable of measuring their confidence about innovating, trying out something new, we understand that that's often based on the fact that they're safe within the environment that we've built for them. If they're uncertain because things don't always work in the way they expect, that impacts innovation. So their willingness to innovate for us is one of the key metrics that we measure, because we think it's a really strong proxy for the fact that they're confident in what we've already got out there because it continues to work in the way that they expect it to work.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? And you're circling it back to the needs again.
It is. All comes back to needs.
Which is what you explained earlier. And so that's an interesting concept. But one of the things that, if you're taking a needs analysis based off of what your students need, how do you get to the point whereby you articulate you're trying to address what they don't know. So, they may not know that there is a specific type of technology which will save 5 minutes of setting up time. They may not know that. So if you're basing it off of need and they're telling you they need X, how do they know they don't need Y?
They know what they need, but they don't know what technology they need. Right. And that's okay. That's our job.
Understood.
Yeah. So again, we don't really talk about technology. We talk about your experience. What is it you need to be able to see? What is it you need to be able to hear? So if you imagine, like, some of our really complex environments might be something that looks and feels a bit like a barn indoors. So it's a big open space, lots of concrete, lots of glass. So from an AV perspective, a bit of a nightmare. Lots of tables and chairs, which can be moved around and are encouraged to be moved around into small groups. So you've got these small groups of people collaborating together on pieces of work that they're doing. They're often bringing in their own work and then collaborating together on changing or improving the piece of work they're doing. You'll have a lecturer who's wandering around too and engaging and giving feedback and having conversations. We want those conversations to be able to be captured and relayed within the room, and also captured and relayed for someone who can't make it there and wants to watch it later, or for someone who was there and was a bit uncertain about what was going on and would just like to watch it again because they thought, well, there was something really interesting that she said, and I'll go back and watch that later. Yeah,
what was it? Let me reverse it and have a look.
So if you can imagine then, you've got maybe 6 or 8 tables all working away, and we're trying to track in time and space the most important things that are going on there so that they can be viewed again later on.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then obviously with things like Teams, when you can transcribe Teams with apps like Firefly and stuff like that, you also have the ability to be able to search a keyword which goes straight to that point, as opposed to rewinding 5 hours and trying to figure out where that person said that thing that you're trying to solve.
And that type of technology is invaluable for us because, again, in some of the courses we do that are more technology focused, so some of the more digital work that our students are involved in, it's a really steep learning curve. Also, a third of our students don't have English as their first language too.
That was good there. You got ahead of one of my questions there.
And so again, that ability to work with the assumption that not everything is going to be understood in the room is critical to our thinking. So that is the sort of stuff that is picked up in needs analysis. So again, if you were to sit in one of our needs analysis conversations, you might be surprised by the fact we don't really talk about technology. We talk about how learning happens, both in the room, and then if you need to go back afterwards, what is it that you expect to see and hear, and how might you interact with that if you go back later to it?
And you shouldn't be a technology-led conversation, because ultimately the technology is just a tool to be able to achieve an outcome. All of our conversations, and talking specifically around SPORE, is what are you trying to achieve? And what's the outcome? What's the expected outcome? And then it's a consultative type conversation where we provide a tool to be able to achieve what the outcome is that's desired. So, it's definitely a needs-led chat as opposed to a technology-led chat. On the technology piece, though, you mentioned that you get ahead of it on an annual basis with regards to budgets and stuff like that. How do you... I mean, it's a big estate, right? So 19,000 students, was it?
19,000 students, 4,000 academic and support staff, 6 big campus buildings.
Crazy. It's a hell of an undertaking. How do you... one of the conversations I've been having quite regularly over these past few weeks is management of warranties, management of asset lists, proactive management of the estate. You mentioned you've got a few teams and stuff. The scale of proactive management in each individual space is limited by the fact that there's only 24 hours in a day. And you have that person going around and checking everything. So how do you manage the estate from a warranty perspective? And then the follow-up question to that is, how does that translate into you proactively putting an annual budget together?
Well, we are taking our first steps into automating a lot of management and support work.
Right.
So we've just carried out a proof of concept with one of the remote management and support platforms.
Gotcha.
And we chose our most difficult space to work in in terms of its physical and its network infrastructure, because we just thought if it works here,
it's going to work anywhere.
Work anywhere. Yeah. So we threw them a real curveball, and what we learned from the proof of concept was it worked.
Right.
Yeah. And it worked in the way we expected it to. So we were able to get back on a monitor screen that we put up on a wall in one of our sort of AV rooms, a really good sense of what kit was working, and when things began not to work, the alerts that came through to say that it's not working. And that all worked in the way we expected.
Right.
Yeah. So that's really encouraging. Yeah. And ultimately, when it comes to break-fix support, and also using that data to influence the prioritization of spend, that's the way that we're going to go in.
Yeah.
Because we can't really cope by doing that on a manual basis, particularly when technology and the way it's deployed in teaching spaces is growing all the time. So we're using a lot more AV than we were 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Anyone who reads the news at the moment will understand that UK universities don't have big pots of funding there, and there's some very painful decisions being made around course retention and job retention. So we're looking, in a sense, like many universities are looking to do more with less. And at the moment, it seems that one of the real growth areas in the industry is there's a plethora of remote management and support platforms coming out.
Yeah.
And again, we're looking to those to use those primarily for remote management and support, but also for asset management too, and for energy management, just to put us in a place where we've got the right level of data coming in to be able to make much more informed and proactive decisions about things like hardware replacement.
It's super, super useful. It's one of the big things I bang on about to all of our staff and on our clients is data for data's sake is useless.
You just have numbers.
You've just got numbers. But actually, if you're collecting data based off of the usage, based off of the whether it's the item's broken or whether it needs a firmware update or whether it needs, and you're able to monitor that remotely, you can then have really in-depth conversations around the use of a meeting room. If it's a 12-person meeting room and Gary's using it on his own every Wednesday because he wants a bit of free time, you can use that data to then make really informed decisions around budget following you. Hey, hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm just going to take a quick 30 seconds of your time to say, if you are an AV director within an organization, an IT director, a facilities director, you're responsible for real estate and meeting room technology specifically. You have an upcoming move, or you have any retrofit moves that you're working for at the moment, and you want to get us involved in the design of that, the implementation, integration, supply of the equipment, and then the ongoing service and support. We put some links below. Feel free to follow the links to follow us to request our support, and we'll make arrangements to come and see you. So that's anyone that's got any kind of AV, video conferencing, meeting room technology solution requirements. Links below. Click the link. We'll make arrangements to come and see you. All right. Enjoy the rest of the show. What platform are you using for your proof of concept?
Mainly QSC.
Okay. Yeah.
At the moment. We are fans of QSys for a variety of reasons. And again, I'm sort of going to go into strategy for a bit here, and I'll sort of build up the picture of why we've gone in that particular direction. So it goes back to a point I made earlier, that we don't have much visibility on change beyond 3 years. Yeah. So if you say, like, what are you going to be teaching to whom and where and how 3 years from now, we go, well, we sort of know.
Yeah.
And again, that's driven by the fact that more and more of our teaching is around technology or using technology. So we're caught up, whether we like it or not, in the pace of change that technology brings. Yeah. So that puts us in a position where I have to say, well, if we're going to design with uncertainty or volatility in mind, then that leads us in certain directions, certain design directions. So the approach that we're taking is this concept of, actually, you don't put that much kit into the room. Yeah. You put lots of infrastructure into and around the room.
Yeah.
And then kit can come in on an as-needs basis.
Yeah.
And the as-needs might not be like, oh, it's just this lesson. It might be, well, this course is based here for this academic year. And so there's a little more permanency of the kit being there.
Yeah.
But at the end of this year, another course might come in. This course might not exist in a year's time.
Yeah.
And so we need to reskin the room. So again, it leads us towards more of an AV over IP mindset. The room effectively becomes a space in which you can plug in many things in many, many different locations, but you don't have to know what those things are.
Yeah, it's super insightful trying to understand how to future-proof a technology choice. And, how do you get to the point where you can say, well, actually, if this happens, then we can change it pretty easily, rather than it being really permanent. And given your background in kind of the corporate world and now the role that you're doing now, what kind of advice would you give to people who are looking at an office move? And what does the journey look like for somebody who's in charge of the technology deployment of let's use an office as an example?
Yeah, so I think two things. One is, again, understand the business's needs. Yeah, what will make the business be successful by being in that building? And those sorts of conversations are relatively straightforward because they don't involve technology. They're about the opportunity and the ability for people to come together to carry out certain work tasks. And again, you can take the approach that we take of like, well, how much certainty do you have about how long that might be the case for? As a business, how long does this iteration of your business strategy actually last for before you're looking to refresh it?
Yeah.
And that then gives you an insight into the pace of change that you're likely going to need to respond to.
Yeah.
So, before I joined UAL, I came from Google.
Yeah.
And Google had this problem in extremes. Yeah. And part of the reason I was brought in was to look at a project where our buildings were non-responsive. Yeah, that's a very polite way of describing something that had a lot of emotion and anger behind it.
Right.
But you had an organisation that was growing at an extreme pace and changing at an extreme pace as well. And again, the individual business units and the heads of those business units felt that if they wanted a meeting room, like they were being told, it sort of takes 8-10 weeks, costs like 100,000.
Yeah.
Like, but I need it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was literally brought in to help resolve that particular tension.
Yeah.
And that led us in a certain direction. And this isn't the solution for everyone, far from it, but there's some really good lessons here. So what we began to do was to look at the estate, the AV estate, and work out like the degrees of permanency that people would be comfortable with. So if you've got an auditorium, you can say, well, that's probably going to be there for 20 years.
Relatively permanent, yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to turn into a car park next year. Yeah. We'll reskin it, we'll put new equipment into it, but we're quite comfortable with that space being that space for 20 years. The really big meeting rooms, like the 60-seaters, we're probably okay with 5 years on those. We couldn't see ourselves moving those in 5 years.
Yeah.
But when it comes to small spaces, like 10-seaters, we just don't know. But what we do know is it needs to change very quickly. Yeah. And we'd like to explore the business implications of it being able to be changed very quickly. And we got to the point where we were able to design small meeting rooms that could be deployed within 24 hours. Yeah. And then in a sense, you're handing the problem back to your user base. You're saying, okay, you've now got all these tools.
You asked for it.
Yeah, you got it. Show us what you can do with it.
Yeah.
And what you saw was business units, and business units at Google were typically like 40 people, given a space and then given almost a tool set to be able to change as they wanted to the way in which their office space was deployed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was brilliant. We'd hit the home run at that point. Because for some teams, they needed very little change. And that's okay. They got what they needed. Yeah. But some teams needed a lot of change. And they also got what they needed too.
And it sounds a lot like there's a management of the need again. So, I mean, if in this conversation I'm having with you, it seems like lots of it, the theme really is really understand the need.
Understand the need.
And then if you've got the need nailed, the rest of it follows.
The rest of it follows, yeah. If you lead with needs, everything else can follow behind it.
Yeah.
Because everything else becomes secondary to it. So, like coming back to UAL, if you look at the work we're doing at the moment, there's an element of it where I'm working with our governance group. And what I'm doing there is a little bit of, I guess I could call it education work. That's going to allow them to make intelligent decisions going forwards on investment. So we're going through a series of workshops where we're looking at the unintended consequences of foregrounding certain design ideas. Yeah. And so if you do enough of these, you end up building up a picture of where things go wrong in AV and how you can get ahead of that. So we're looking at issues like sustainability and accessibility, modularity, low cost of delivery. Because often when it comes to AV design, they're the things that get foregrounded. There's assumptions built into a design that are not always named or named that explicitly.
Yeah.
And being able to say, well, actually, no, what's really important for us is this. This is what you should foreground in design, allows any design coming forwards to be challenged.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And what it looks like is happening for us, and we're not there yet, we're sort of partway through this process, is this idea that the user experience doesn't change. Yeah. It only changes at the pace that the customers need.
Of course.
That, I think, is going to end up being the thing that we focus on as our core design principle.
And back to the theme again, right? So it's a need-driven change rather than a want-driven
They'll
change.
tell us when they need it to change, because it's going to be based on their teaching needs changing, and that's the right time to respond.
And that's super helpful. And from your experience at Google and your experience at the university, what do people? How are they getting it wrong? What do people do wrong? We're obviously talking about a needs-based solution here, but you've walked into the nightmares, haven't you, of AV rooms?
Oh, yeah.
So
I used to have hair when I started this job.
Yeah. I was a lot less grey when I started this as well. But I suppose, what do people not know that they don't know when it comes to a design, a deployment, a service maintenance management of the meeting room technology or, classroom technology solutions?
I could spend a day answering that question.
I threw it at you, didn't I? I was having a coffee.
You did, but I'm gonna focus on one thing, and it's this idea of how you link understanding your needs back to the designs that come out of that. Yeah, so a really good needs analysis should be able to demonstrate how the AV solution actually supports those needs. Yeah, that's really straightforward, because in a sense, all you're doing is taking the needs analysis and just feeding it back. If we get this right, these are the things that should happen, correct?
Yeah.
And your client should be able to go, yeah, correct, that's it, you've got it, great. Yeah. But then we go into this very grey and murky area of, okay, how well does the design actually allow us to do that? Yeah, and that's often where assumptions are made, and those assumptions aren't often explicit. So I really feel there's a need here to develop like a common language that you can use with your clients, where you say, okay, look, we can meet your needs and this is how we're going to go about it. And we're foregrounding these particular elements of design thinking in the work we're doing.
Yeah.
So for us at UAL, I think, because we've not completed this process, but I think what we're likely to foreground is the fact that the user experience doesn't change that much. Yeah, that there's an internal logic to the user experience. So when it changes, you can go, oh yeah, I get that. I recognize what that is. Yeah, there's like a new cable symbol on this, and I know what the cable symbols are because I've been working with those cable symbols for years. Yeah. So we must have a new cable that we need here. So there's an internal logic to it.
Yeah,
because again, for us, when we do our needs analysis, what we keep coming back to is this idea of give us stability. Yeah, because once we have stability, we can innovate off the back of that. If you give us an inherently unstable environment, we're not interested.
We're too busy fighting fires.
Innovating. Yeah. Exactly. We're going to go back to using PowerPoint slides and talking over PowerPoint slides. So again, I think for us, it's this core concept where we talk back to the client to say, okay, this is how we're going to meet your needs and this is how we're going to support your needs over time.
Yeah.
Is again this common language where we say, look, I think the thing we're foregrounding here is a user experience that changes at the pace that you're comfortable with, because it's driven by your need for change, not our need for change.
Yeah. And again, it's back to that theme of trying to understand what the end user wants. What's the reason
what the
for
end user needs.
Yeah, used the term again, didn't I? How do you get ahead then of setting expectations on budget? So I know you've got, your various finance teams who own the budget. You have a meeting where the client explains the needs of that specific room. You put the designs together, and then they go, holy crap, I wasn't expecting technology to be that expensive. I haven't got that cleared through my various channels. How do you balance the need conversation with the reality of the price?
Well, we're going through quite a significant internal change process at the moment where that's becoming much more explicit. And so the work that goes on when a course is going to be generated, like when a new course is coming in, an element of that is what are the lifetime technology costs here? And so for us, we're just delighted to see that, because it means that the work that we've been doing, the awareness raising that we've been doing has sort of taken hold.
Yeah.
Because it's our finance and our senior leadership team saying, okay, part of the decision-making process about which courses we support needs to be based on the lifetime cost of technology ownership for those courses.
Yeah. And having somebody like you internal at UAL is vital to be able to bridge that conversation gap.
Yeah.
I think because you know the industry, you know the technology, you know roughly what things cost. I think one of the challenges, here's the question really is, how does somebody who doesn't have an internal IT AV team, how early should they be getting the AV conversation involved when it comes to stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 design? How early should that?
Day one.
Yeah.
Day one.
Yeah.
You know, I've been in the industry now 35 years. And if I've learned one thing, it's that you need to get AV involved in day one, because if you don't, you'll just end up making design and construction assumptions that will be really expensive.
You've seen
to unpick.
Yeah, we've seen it with all architects and all sorts of stuff who come up with these really elaborate and fantastic designs, and then you get the floor plan, you just go, you're gonna have to go back to the drawing board, guys.
Yeah, exactly. And if you are right, and if you come in with a needs analysis early on, it allows you to negotiate and debate about needs, and there are going to be priorities and hierarchies of needs there. And again, typically these aren't discussions that the AV team ends up making decisions on, but it does allow you to escalate back to leadership to say, look, we've got competing needs in these particular spots or these particular areas. We need guidance on what comes out in the hierarchy of needs.
And I think, I'm slightly biased because of the role and the company that I've got, but I always see it as, what's the point of the meeting room? Really the point of the meeting room is not that great, it looks fancy, but actually we're here to have a meeting. We're here to collaborate, and if the technology needs have not been addressed early on in that design phase, your hierarchy of needs conversation then comes into effect, where you're fighting fires basically.
Yeah, you are. And in terms of like how you manage that going forwards, at Google we used to manage we had two key metrics. And this again is it's a really interesting piece of Google-like thinking that I'm happy sharing, that anyone who's listening can take and borrow. So there were two metrics. One was a very simple in-room metric. So every meeting room had a touchscreen in it, which was the meeting controller. Yeah. And as your meeting ended, it just came up with how was your meeting? 5 stars. Yeah. And asked nothing more than that.
Right.
And so we used to get quite a lot of feedback through that. Yeah. And again, because it's instant, you're getting instant concrete sentiment. You're not asking someone 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
And so we started off with, I think our target was originally an average of 4.8. And over the years, it moved up to 4.93. Yeah. And if you're not meeting it, you need to go and find out why.
Yeah.
And that's when you're going back to your user base and saying, what's going wrong? Yeah. And they'll tell you what's going wrong, and you can then fix it.
Yeah, we're literally speaking to a company at the moment around using their software, which is the same sort of thing as part of our own service contracts. And the policies that they have in place are, ignore the 3 and 4 stars, look at the 1 and 2 stars, and look at the 5 stars, understand what's good, and understand what's not good,
exactly,
and why.
Yeah, go and research it, and you'll find the answers out. Because again, a little earlier on, we were talking about data, and data is very valuable when it creates insights. By itself, it's numbers. So one of the lessons, again, I and my colleagues learned at Google is the numbers by themselves only give you so much insight. if you go and talk to users, you'll find out what's driving them to make the decisions
Yeah.
and give the ratings too. So if you rely purely on numbers, you're going to get a very biased and incomplete view of what's going on. So for us at Google, like our second metric really opened that one up, because what we did was we surveyed everyone who worked in a building that had more than 200 staff in it. And we surveyed them twice a year. And it was a really simple piece of surveying work that ended up sort of gathering a reputation as being valuable. And so we used to get like engagement metrics of 35 to 40%. And you're looking at an audience size of nearly 100,000 people.
Yeah.
So you get 35,000 responses coming back. So this you'd get emails, Chris, it's that time of year. We'd like to get your feedback on work.
Yeah.
So we always send it out on a Tuesday, and it would say, Chris, yesterday, did you need to do any focused work in the office? Yes or no?
Right.
You go, yes, I did. Okay, there's a follow-up question. How did the building help or hinder you in achieving that? And that was it. That's what we wanted to know.
Gotcha.
Second question, Chris, yesterday, did you need to do any collaborative work over distance? Yes or no? The answer was yes. You can see what the follow-up was.
Yeah, of course.
How did the building help or hinder you? So from that, you get a much better sense of what's driving people's behaviours.
Yeah.
Why they're making the decisions that they're making that you see reflected back in the data. Without that, you don't understand what's motivating to make the choices that they're making.
And
you
again,
just see them making choices.
And again, the data there takes you back to the need.
Yeah.
So, everything that we've spoken about here, there seems to be the common thread, which is the roots of all of the decisions that you're making and the 5-star reviews and all of that kind of stuff actually all refers back to the need. And then this ongoing evolution of technology being driven by the need of the business.
Yeah, and at Google, it was really refined well. So in technology and in real estate, we had the same goal. It's the same vision statement, which is our role is to make Googlers uniquely productive. That's what we were there to do. And so if you take that into the survey, basically what you're saying is, how are we getting in the way of you doing your job?
Yeah.
And people will gladly tell you how things yesterday, because again, we're interested in people's opinions, but their concrete experience yesterday is much more valid.
And across 40,000 responses,
Exactly.
You've got a pretty good data set there.
You get a real sense of, again, all the design work that you've done at a building level, is it helping or is it hindering people from carrying out the job they need to do? And they will tell you. So what we used to do is we used to run that every 6 months, and like the gap in between. So every other quarter we would be on a roadshow saying, you told us this is what we're doing about it. This one you told us about 9 months ago, and this is what we've done about it.
Yeah.
So people got the sense, our participants got the sense of hey, I filled in that form and these people are coming around and they're telling me what they're doing about it. So you set it up as a virtuous circle.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant, Gary. I could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately, I don't have that luxury. I think just to round it off, really, what you're very experienced in this field. What kind of advice would you give in terms of wisdom for young up and coming people who are in that role within organisations, who are looking at office moves, looking at retrofits, and they're potentially in a team who's responsible for the technology deployments? How would you impart some wisdom on those people? I
think there's very few problems that come out of the scenarios that you've described that have technology-shaped answers for them. Technology is going to be part of the solution, but not all of the solution. So knowing that you work in partnership, and that your voice has equal validity, but no more validity than the other stakeholders you're working with, I think that's critical.
Yeah.
I really do.
Taking us back to our conversation around design phase. Yeah. The earlier the better.
Yeah.
Seat at the table.
Yeah. Be in there. So I'm going to give you a second piece of wisdom.
Do.
Be in there on day one.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to fight for that. Yeah. There's enough of us around who have grey hair or no hair that can fill you in on the horror stories of not having been involved on day one and how that plays itself out, to be able to give you the ammunition to go in there and say, no, I need to be here on day one.
Gary, that's brilliant. How do people stay in touch with you? How do they follow your journey?
People can stay in touch with me primarily through LinkedIn.
Fantastic.
So I'm often on there. Again, I post little bits about the work that we do, stuff that I'm involved in at an industry level. I often like lots of things too that I see. So I see part of my role in the industry as being out there encouraging people to do good work and rewarding it through likes and comments when I see it too. So yeah, LinkedIn's the best way to get hold of me.
Brilliant. Gary, thank you. Appreciate you joining me. And
Chris, it's been a real pleasure.
Hopefully it's not been too bad on your throat.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
Hope you enjoyed the show. I certainly enjoyed interviewing that guest, and again, I learned an awful lot in the process of that. If you did enjoy the show and you want to see how we integrated a multi-level AV solution with one of our clients, we've done a quick video on that here, so check that out. That just talks through how we put together project teams for a multi-level AV project that we delivered. And again, if you want to contact us for any reason, we've got some links below. Feel free to follow links. One of our team will be in touch, and we can make some arrangements to be in contact with each other. Glad you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next one that's going to be released soon.